Good evening and welcome to the show. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller and you have tuned into your Alaska weather. Tonight is May 15th, 2018, Tuesday evening. Thanks for joining us, and if you need to get in touch with us, 1-800-472-0391, and that'll get you a statewide number to get you to the Juneau, Fairbanks, or Anchorage office. If you want to see us on the web, weather.gov/Alaska, and again, that'll be the whole state, and you can dial in your forecast using the point-and-click option. Just keep clicking on the map to get as up close and personal to your area as you'd like to see the forecast for. And then at our email address, nws.artvweather@noaa.gov, and Mr. Snider or one of us will get back in touch with you as soon as we can. So let's dive right in, and as you can see here, we do have one hazard to talk about tonight, and it's a little unusual, but we do have a frost advisory out in effect for the inland valleys down there near the Mendenhall Valley and the Hoonah area. This is for the Juneau Forecast Office, and this is going to be in effect Wednesday morning. Should just be a very brief period of time, but we do have low temperatures bottoming out for Hoonah at about 33 degrees and for Mendenhall Valley at about 34 degrees. So that'll be a brief period around 5 a.m. probably Wednesday morning, and then temperatures will quickly rebound as the sun will be shining. But these clear skies overnight have led to a frost advisory for all those growers out there in the southeastern portion of our state. And that is our only hazard. Now we are on to our breakup map for this evening. And as you can see here, pretty quiet conditions for much of the Kuskokwim area. Most of the area has mushed out at this point, and most of the ice is out. There are still some ice-covered areas south of Galena that we will be monitoring. And then some areas that are starting to open up here along the Yukon, just near the Eagle area. And we do have folks conducting the river watch out in those areas as well. So let me slide over here so you can get a better view of the legend. So again, just keeping an eye on areas up near the Yukon and then down by Galena, watching for how things will break up in those areas, and our river watch and our RSC are keeping a close eye on all these things. But it's been relatively slow with the cool pattern that we've been in. How about fire danger? Well, again, cool pattern means cool and wet, I should say, means that it's been pretty quiet. We just have some high creeping into areas north of the Alaska Range. Some of the winds have helped to dry things out up there. Temperatures are finally starting to come up with the thermal trough building, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. And so thus we do have some high fire danger. As we look now at our satellite loop, here you can see really the big story is ridge building over southeast Alaska, thermal trough trying to take shape over the eastern portion of the state through the Yukon Territory and up into eastern Alaska. But for much of southwest and south central and even western and northern Alaska, the rest of the area is pretty much under this southerly flow with a cold trough spinning out here, out over the eastern portion of the Bering Sea. And so there you can see these parent lows that keep setting up in this area near the Kuskokwim Bay. And what happens is they just basically bring around more cold air and more moisture and push it right up into southern Alaska. And then that moisture feeds its way all the way up along the Alaska Range through much of the Brooks Range and up into the northern portion of the state. So we'll look at the IR feature here one more time. I'll slide over, but there's not a whole lot to see down in Juneau's area as it's pretty quiet down there with clear skies. We'll switch here and look at it again. Clear skies, and you can see that moisture feed continues to move into southwest and south central Alaska, even triggering some thunderstorms up here towards the interior portion of the state. And so we do have that in this afternoon's surface map. As you can see there, some thunderstorms up near the Fairbanks area, and those have had some very small ice pellets, not quite what we would consider considerable hail, but they have had some small ice pellets associated with those thunderstorms. But otherwise, a great day down there for southeast Alaska, as we've been talking about. You can see this area of high pressure at 1,025 millibars, and that is built up and over across southeast Alaska, so making for rather nice conditions there with some drier offshore flow. And you're really the sunniest spot across the entire map. As you can see here, our southerly flow keeping systems and moisture working their way from south to north up towards Kodiak Island, bringing some moderate rain possibly into these areas, but mostly it's the showers that are widespread from southwest Alaska up into south central Alaska. And with that, we have seen at higher elevations and even some lower elevations, some snow starting to mix in with these showers. Places around the Anchorage Bowl saw snow levels drop down last night, where Glen Alps had accumulating snowfall. And then snow, of course, at the higher elevations too in the Aleutian and the Alaska ranges. As we look towards the northwestern portion of the state, still some rain continuing along the ranges up there associated with this lower pressure here in this trough, but snow once you get up towards the Brooks Range. Fog has been a problem up near the Kotzebue Sound, and it's actually been dense at times, and we expect that to continue overnight tonight. So with aviation interest in those areas, be mindful that the fog could return and stay there tonight, and it could be a problem for aviation interest tomorrow morning. As we look out towards the Aleutians, here's a weak area of low pressure that will quickly dissipate, but before it does so, bringing some snow showers to the Pribilof Islands and even to the north side of the Alaska Peninsula in the Aleutian chain. High pressure holding strong out there, out over the western Aleutians, but another system starts to approach, and we'll see that better as we step into tonight's forecast. There you can see that next warm front starting to push into the area. Not going to make a whole lot of impact into this high pressure here at 1,024 millibars. What this high will do is continue to create fog and low stratus out over the Bering Sea with not a lot of flow to help mix things out. As we get a little closer towards the mainland, you can see here showers and snow showers will continue across south central and southwest Alaska. The flow is really out of the south and east, and so that's favoring upslope along the Kenai Peninsula into Prince William Sound. That's where you'll see those slightly heavier amounts of rain and maybe up towards the higher elevations, some snow up there, but we expect that to be really confined to the highest elevations. It's not quite cold enough to bring that snow too far down tonight. As we get up towards the Alaska Range, there's that area of low pressure, kind of reminiscent of a thermal trough. You can see it builds in from the Yukon Territory and then starts to creep towards the central portion of the state. So it's got characteristics, but we're not really warm enough to see it truly take shape yet. If we do get into that pattern, we would see more thunderstorms and fire weather danger would increase. Not quite there yet in the middle of May. Fog will be a hazard along the north slope, as you would expect, with the light flow up there this time of year transitioning into the open water, so plenty of moisture available. And then the showers will continue across much of the interior Alaska, and high pressure remaining in control for southeast. How about for Wednesday? Well, high pressure is going to remain in control for southeast Alaska, now at 1,028 millibars, so strengthening. This is kind of an extension of the North American ridge and pushes into southeast Alaska, keeping you folks in beautiful conditions, VFR weather down there. As we get towards the south central portion of the state and southwest, another system starting to move up by Wednesday afternoon, pushing more rain and some snow up along the Aleutian and Alaska ranges, but more rain into the Kodiak area and the southeastern portions of the Alaska range. Thunderstorms once again to be expected between about the Galena and Bettles area on Wednesday afternoon. Those should develop again as that kind of weak thermal trough is in place. And then as we get towards Kotzebue Sound, that's where we have the fog continuing into Wednesday. Could be a lingering thing without a whole lot of strong weather patterns to change this up. And then as we look towards the western Aleutians, there's our front starting to stretch in on Wednesday. And by Thursday, it actually doesn't really make a lot of progress and starts to fall apart out there west of Shimia. 1,021 starting to slip to the north, that high slipping to the north, leaving some fog and maybe just a few snow showers in place out over the eastern Bering Sea. And then as we look towards southern Alaska, that's where we can see that plume of moisture continuing up from south to north. A little bit more of a southeasterly direction on Thursday, but that still could bring plenty of rain to the Kenai Peninsula and up to the lower portions of the Susitna Valley, with even mixing some snow there along the higher elevations again, and that extends all the way over into the Copper River Basin as well. High pressure at 1,023 millibars now, so a little bit weaker, but still keeping very nice conditions for much of southeast Alaska. And then up towards the Brooks Range, a weak area of low pressure will bring another round of some rain and snow, but not expected to be widespread. So how about those temperatures? Well, again, for the lows overnight, the areas that we're the most concerned about will be 33 degrees near Hoonah and about 34 degrees in the Mendenhall Valley. So if you have any agricultural interest out here, please be advised that it could be sensitive to plants at those temperatures. As we get towards the Copper River Basin, expect pretty cold overnight temperatures right around freezing. And then we're that southerly flow and plenty of cloud cover, keeping things in the low 30s for much of southwest Alaska. Up towards the Brooks Range, temperatures starting to fall back towards 30 degrees, and then along the Arctic slope there in the teens. Down towards southwest Alaska, we'll expect conditions right around the mid-30s. For highs on Wednesday, rebounding pretty quick into the low 60s and upper 50s for southeast. all the way up to 62 there in northeastern portion of the state, and then generally in the 40s and 50s for much of southwest and south central Alaska. For Thursday morning lows, we expect them to be just in the upper 30s, and then temperatures pretty consistent across the board for much of the rest of the mainland, with temperatures between about 30 and 40. And then by Thursday afternoon, rebounding nicely where the sun is out, but staying in the clouds, keeping.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, let's head on up in the atmosphere to your flying weather forecast now. And as you can see here Wednesday morning, with our moist southerly flow pushing up against the south side of the state, again, widespread MVFR conditions hovering throughout south central and even parts of southwest Alaska. The IFR conditions are really going to favor the south and southeast facing terrain as flow moves in here with the moisture. It really upslopes against that terrain and starts to help to create the lower ceilings, lower visibility. So that's where we expect the worst conditions, but certainly plenty of MVFR unless you're in the lee of the mountains there right near Anchorage and parts of the Kenai Peninsula. Widespread MVFR again out for the western Aleutians and all the way through the eastern Bering, even up into the Norton Sound there. And then over the northern portion of the state, expect widespread IFR conditions up along the Brooks Range. Not going to be good flying there tomorrow at all. IFR conditions will continue through the afternoon. We see another system approaching from the south, from the North Pacific, moving from south to north here, and that is going to bring more IFR conditions to parts of Kodiak Island and again parts of Prince William Sound, where we see that favorable south to southeast flow helping to create lower ceilings and visibility in those areas. Otherwise, widespread MVFR conditions around that. And then out towards the Bering Sea, again, more widespread MVFR conditions with just fairly weak flow, not really helping to mix this out. As we look towards Juneau, well, that's where we're going to see the VFR conditions for southeast Alaska, and that's going to continue on into Thursday morning as well, with plenty of high pressure keeping things high and dry there. As we look into south central Alaska and southwest Alaska for Thursday morning, IFR conditions continue to creep a little bit further north with more of that MVFR conditions on the upslope side of those Chugach and Kenai Mountains, and again for the Alaska Range and the Aleutian Range as well. Conditions starting to slowly improve along the Brooks Range, but another area of MVFR conditions hugging right up along the mountains there, and then a little bit more MVFR conditions out through the eastern Aleutians and along the west coast with widespread IFR out towards St. Matthew Island. And then on into Thursday afternoon, we start to see conditions improve ever so slightly along the north slope, but still seeing those IFR conditions up against the south side of the terrain along the Prince William Sound and through the Kenai Peninsula, and then on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula as well, off into the eastern Aleutians. MVFR conditions persist across the Bering, not much change there. So for Anaktuvuk and again Adigan Pass, we're really looking for those MVFR conditions and IFR conditions to be locked in on the north side of the pass. So if you're going south to north, you'll experience pretty good conditions on the south side, but on the north side, you can definitely expect those IFR conditions. So Adigan and Anaktuvuk Pass will be IFR north side. Lake Clark and Merrill should be showing some signs of improvement through the day with a little bit more flow. Rainy, IFR becoming marginal visual flight rules. Windy, similar story there. Isabel will be our first spot where we expect some VFR conditions in the afternoon, and that's going to be the case throughout the day for Mentasta Pass and for Tanita as well. And then as we look towards Portage, well, sorry if you're planning on flying through there tomorrow. Looks like we're going to be socked in with IFR conditions, ceilings, and visibilities in the instrument flight rules category. Chilkoot and White Pass should be VFR with gorgeous flying weather for much of southeast Alaska, so look forward to that. So here's our freezing levels, and this kind of tells the story of where all that cold air is really bunched up and packed up. You can see from surface up to about 2,000 feet as where that freezing level is hovering across much of the eastern Bering and southwest Alaska. And so what does that mean is that cold trough is just continuing to sit out there and bring moisture up into much of the Kodiak and down into the Aleutian and Alaska range. So that's where we have those lower freezing levels, and it's on either side of that where the freezing levels are starting to creep up towards 8,000 feet there near the Dixon entrance, and we'll see those continue to gain some ground over parts of southeast Alaska. And as that ridge of high pressure starts to build in from the east, even starting to see some freezing levels jump up to 4,000 feet there near Eagle. So how does that play out in our icing? Well, expect widespread icing basically once you're east of the Alaska Range, south and east of the Alaska Range, all the way to the west, above 5,000 feet isolated moderate, and then above 6,000 feet some considerable moderate there in the North Pacific. For our jet stream, moving in pretty quick from Russia, north to south, 95 knots, becomes west to east, 125 knots, dives down to support this low, and really this is where we continue to see system after system just come off this jet and spin through southwest Alaska, and then it turns from west to east over top of this ridge here, building over the North Pacific and North American ridge. Reflected in the 9,000-foot winds, well, we have our biggest area of tight gradient right down here. Southeast winds coming in around this low at about 35 knots. And then our next low is helping to bring up some southeast winds at about 35 knots there as well. In areas where we don't see a lot of arrows, that's really calm conditions or 5 knots or less, but otherwise generally subtly flow across the state. And that's a similar story there at 3,000 feet, similarly southeast winds across much of the Gulf. How does that look then at turbulence? Well, pretty quiet, except for right there north of the Barren Islands, some isolated moderate below 5,000.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is our good friend Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. He is here and has been here many times to talk to us about weather satellites and how those can help Alaskans understand our weather, how we can do better detection, keep more people safe from things even like volcanic ash. But today, Eric, you're going to talk to us a little bit more about weather satellites and how that can keep Alaskans safe and protect our property from wildfire, right?
That's right, Dave. Today's topic is where there's smoke, there's fire. And thanks for having us back again to Alaska
Anytime.
Weather. Well, weather satellites have a lot of different instruments on them. It turns out that the electromagnetic spectrum has a lot going on in it, and only one part of that is visible light, what we see.
Right.
Weather satellites, of course, report that. Today's topic is wildfires.
Okay.
There are some people who say that in Alaska in the summertime you don't have severe weather. These people are usually from Oklahoma or somewhere, and F5 tornadoes tend not to occur in Alaska.
Right.
People have also said what we do have in the summer. What is Alaska's severe summer weather can be hydrology,
Right.
flash flood and erosion in the mountains and things like that, and fires, wildfires.
Absolutely.
Those were here in 2004, certainly remember that. We've got an example here from 2014. Now it was a quiet season overall, but in May, down on the Kenai Peninsula, we had a wildfire on the Funny River, and this is a satellite image from a polar orbiter that went right over Alaska, and we can see the plume of smoke coming out of that fire on the Kenai, curling down. It's caught in the wind. It goes down toward Kodiak Island, curves around. You can see it circulating around a low-pressure system that's in the Gulf of Alaska.
It was a beautiful picture.
Oh my gosh.
Except there was a fire.
There's a fire there. The nice thing is with this satellite image, you can tell where the fire origin is, where the smoke is coming from. And it's a color image. We're looking at the wavelength spectrum of about 0.4 to 0.7 micrometers or microns. That's what the human eye would see. If you were riding on the satellite and looked down, you could see this kind of an image.
Right.
So that's pretty nice. But it turns out there's more to the electromagnetic spectrum than just visible light.
Okay.
You've heard of infrared, ultraviolet, that kind of thing. If we move into longer wavelengths, let's go to one specifically, 3.7 micron.
Okay, 3.7.
Why worry about that one?
Okay.
Well, we've got an example here. 3.7, it turns out, happens to be very sensitive to a certain temperature range, temperatures where fires burn.
Okay.
And so we've got an example zoomed in a little more from that same Funny River fire down on the Kenai Peninsula, and we can see that you get up into a few hundred degrees Fahrenheit, and that's where the colors are. We can see there on the Funny River fire to the west and to the east, almost a horseshoe shape there, is not only we're seeing where the fire is in a general sense, but specifically where it's the active fire
That is where
front.
it's burning right now.
And it's
Amazing.
3.7 microns is the important temperature there.
Okay.
That's right.
So this is really important to firefighters on the ground, people that are making plans and directing the firefighters on where they need to go and cut the trenches and keep people safe.
You know it. If you want to fight that fire, you got to know where it is.
Okay.
You got to know the leading edge. We've also got a movie loop, nothing quite like animating it in time.
Yeah.
You can see the fire spreading out over time with a succession of film or a succession of images. Now this is one channel, 3.7 micron. You know, we looked at that color smoke image before.
Right.
And that's actually a red, a green, and a blue. That's how you get color imagery. What if you took 3 different wavelengths in the infrared? You went from like 2.2 micron, 1.5 micron, up to 3.7. You mix them together, you get this other kind of color image, which is even a better way to sharply bring out the details of where that leading edge of the fire is.
Okay.
You'll note, though, in the infrared, guess what? We don't see the smoke. That's too bad. And on these movie loops, you can see the clouds go by. These channels can't see through clouds. The lesson is there's no one perfect solution. You got to have the visible, you got to have some of that infrared single 3.7 channel, some of the infrared mixing to help get a different perspective. Another one, we've talked before about a fun channel called the day-night band.
Yes, one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, and in Alaska in the winter, it's great. We've got all this darkness. The day-night band is so sensitive to seeing light. You can see features that otherwise aren't available. Now in Alaska, when you have a forest fire, it tends to be light out all the time.
Right.
It's our summer. But we can go down south to the Rim Fire in California in 2013. Now, okay, it was in California, not Alaska, but Alaskan crews went down to fight that fire, so we can talk about it here on Alaska Weather. Here we have a 3.7 micron channel shot of the rim fire, again kind of a horseshoe shape, showing that active fire front down there. And then we'll look again to the day-night band, the visible light, and then you can see how the fire is all bright. You can see the active fire front and actually the city lights over there too. Turns out that the cities, while they're active in a social sense, are not really hot in a fire sense. So they don't show up in the 3.7 micron. They're not hot like a fire is, but the fire in the cities look the same from a visible light perspective. And a fun thing here too is that we can see the smoke plume going north from the rim fire on the day-night band. So if we were ever to have, like in 2004 in Alaska, you get dark at night, we still had an active fire season that year.
Right.
That was, you know, that really bad year. The day-night band didn't exist then, but if we had fires now in August, we could use it then. The lesson here is weather satellites, they offer many different wavelengths of light. Some are used for different purposes, and some of these that we just looked at tonight are especially helpful here in Alaska to find and to track the behavior of these wildfires so the crews can go out there and do their jobs.
Sure, sure. So a satellite toolbox for the firefighting crews and the fire weather forecasters, and it just underlines how important satellites are, especially for Alaska and our mission for the National Weather Service to protect life and property, and also to enhance the national economy. So wonderful stuff there, Eric. And people can look at pictures like this anytime by going to gina.alaska.edu. You'll find images there all around Alaska at various times of the year, and not just about fire weather, but volcanic ash and smoke and anything else you want to check out. They're always beautiful pictures and always interesting to look at no matter what time of the day. Thanks again for joining us, Eric. We appreciate it and welcome you back anytime. For this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. See you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
On into your marine forecast now. Let's get started with your sea ice analysis by Mr. Chris this afternoon. And as you can see here down towards Norton Sound, just a little bit of shore fast ice remains. That's that white area there on the south side of the sound. Otherwise, it's mostly marginal ice now and continues to melt out and mush out throughout the region because of the warm temperatures and the fairly good winds moving out of the south to the southeast. But otherwise, across the rest of the area, still some pack ice up along the north slope east of Point Barrow. But once you get west of Point Barrow, things start to open up and continue to melt out slowly, basically stretching down all the way through the Bering Strait and the southern Chukchi Sea. So that's the continued trend. We are a little bit ahead of normal for climatology, but otherwise, for the most part, on track. This northeast flow and the slightly cooler conditions have allowed some young ice to regrow, but otherwise it's been mostly a melting situation across the ice pack. As we get into Wednesday afternoon and Wednesday morning for your southeast forecast, expect south winds at about 10 knots for Lynn Canal and seas about 2 feet, and then northwest winds 10 to 20 knots and 2 to 4 foot seas from Stevens Passage down through Clarence Strait. Out over the open waters, a little bit more variable winds over the northern portion of the Gulf at about 10 knots and seas between 3 and 6 feet. But then as you get towards the southern portion of the open waters, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, small craft level winds there, and 5 to 7 foot seas. The trend is not going to be very quick to change across southeast Alaska with mostly sea breezes. Now expecting north winds through Lynn Canal 10 knots, 2 foot seas, and northwest 10 to 15, 2 to 3 foot seas for the other parts of the inner passageways. For the open waters, you can see the winds basically just following along the terrain there. West becoming northerly winds 10 to 20 knots and seas between 5 and 6 feet on Thursday. For Wednesday, across South Central, you can expect primarily an easterly flow, except over the Cook Inlet where we're a little bit more north and northeast. Anywhere between 10 to 15 knots for the protected areas, climbing from 20 up to 30 knots near the Barren Islands, courtesy of that next area of low pressure approaching south of Kodiak. Seas in protected areas 2 to 3 feet, out over the open waters closer to 6 to 9 feet. On into Thursday then. You can see here across much of the closed protected waters for Prince William Sound, northeast wind 15 knots and seas about 3 feet. Northern Cook Inlet 20 knots out of the north and seas 4 feet. And then southeasterly winds and switching to a northeast and then again a southeast. So a little bit of a variable flow here, 20 to 30 knots across the northern portions of the Gulf, and then expecting a little bit more of a north and easterly wind for the southern portion of the Cook Inlet between 7 and 10 foot seas. Towards the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, expect east and northeast winds, 15 to 30 knots, and seas on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, 3 to 4 feet, but on the south side, anywhere between 6 and 8 feet. And then on into Thursday, more of an easterly flow, 20 knots ahead of that front, and seas generally between 6 and 9 feet, unless you're north of the peninsula, 2 to 5 feet. Once we look out towards the Aleutians, on Wednesday you can see more of a northeasterly flow and northerly flow for the eastern Aleutians at between 10 and 25 knots, and seas are going to be about 4 to 6 feet. But then once you're out towards the next front approaching over the western Aleutians, 25 to 35 knots on about a 5 to 12 foot sea. Then on into Thursday, keeping that rather stiff wind, 25 to 30 knots, small craft out there, 9 to 13 foot seas for the western Aleutians, and then a little bit more of an east and northerly flow, 15 to 20 knots, seas on the order of about 4 to 7 feet. For the west coast, you can expect generally a northerly wind across the area, except up towards Nome, where it's a little bit more southwesterly, and seas are generally going to be between 2 and 3 feet with winds about 10 to 15 knots. And for Thursday, expect that switch to northeasterly across the area. Seas are generally going to be between 2 and 4 feet and winds 10 to 20 knots. And then finally for our Arctic coast on Wednesday, expect an easterly flow across much of the Arctic coastline there until you get to the southern Chukchi Sea, where it switches to a west and northwest, a weak area of low pressure there just inland of Kotzebue, so keeping things a little bit more swirling around there. Seas anywhere between 1 and 3 feet where the ice is not still shore fast. And then on Thursday, expect easterly winds 10 to 15 knots along the north slope, and then becoming more west and northeast along the Kotzebue and Norton Sounds there, 5 to 10 knots for those areas where it's 10 to 15 knots north of along the Arctic coast there. Then as we get back to our surface weather recap, you can see for tonight, high pressure remains in control, keeping Juneau clear skies with temperatures starting to bottom out near the freezing mark. So we do have a frost advisory in effect for the Hoonah and Mendenhall valleys. And then as we get into Wednesday, expect another round of thunderstorms for the interior. And into Thursday, continued wet weather across southwest and south central with high pressure over southeast. Thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.